Well, the UFC has a bit of a new betting scandal. It's been a few years. I think 2022 was the last time this kind of thing surfaced. This would be the third known betting scandal that they have in the organization's history, and it took place over the weekend. Let's talk about what we know. First, a disclosure. I host a podcast called Morning Combat that airs on the DraftKings network. All right, so this fight took place on the UFC Fight Night Garcia versus Onama card. That was the one that took place on Saturday. It aired on ESPN Plus. It took place at the UFC's Apex facility. This is in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, that's relevant for a couple of reasons, not least of which is depending on what happens here, and it seems like we don't really know what's going to happen, but to the extent that we do, the Nevada Athletic Commission will be one of the relevant authorities that could have some say. We'll come back to that a little bit later. But what happened? Well, the basic details are as follows. There was a featherweight contest on the main card between two fighters, Yair Del Valle, and on the other side, Isaac Dolgarian. And early in the week, really nothing to speak of. No one really had any inclination about anything. Dolgarian was a decent favorite, I think about a minus 245, depending on where you looked. But then what caught everyone's attention was that about an hour or so before the bout, a bunch of money came in on Del Valle, in particular for him to win and by finish in the first round. This is kind of important for a number of reasons because A, it moved the betting lines in a highly unusual, and I think what some people online would say is a very suspicious way. And then more to the point, Dolgarian had actually never been finished in his career. So what happened in the bout? Well, as you may have guessed, Dolgarian loses via submission in the first round. But you actually have to watch the fight itself. I cannot post footage. I can encourage you to go to the ESPN Plus archives to take a look. But the basic detail is that during the bout itself, Daniel Cormier, who was commentating, couldn't believe the lack of hand fighting and proper defense more broadly from Dolgarian. And then afterwards, you had Michael Chiesa, almost apoplectic during the post-fight show, really taking it to Dolgarian, calling it, I think, an F- performance in terms of the kind of effort and just sort of known best practices that go into defense at this level of the game. And to be clear, Dolgarian was some time ago a pretty hyped prospect. He's just 29 years old. Well, that'll be important in just a moment as well. But I want to be clear, if you just saw the fight itself, maybe not, it would raise your ire. But the fact that he'd never been finished, and then there was this suspicious betting line movement, as well as the nature of how he was finished, well, it raised a lot of red flags. After the fight, what you have to understand is obviously there's going to be enormous speculation about what is happening. Some sports books indicated, by the way, that they were looking into the matter, or certainly aware that there was something kind of anomalous about what had happened. Others just straight up issuing refunds. There's a report this morning from Ariel Helwani that Isaac Dolgarian had been released from his contract. Now, I think he was at the end of his deal, and of course, they could just say that they're releasing him from that. But the fact that they're doing it right after a main card spot with this very suspicious activity just certainly raises even more questions about what the UFC knows and what they might be doing about it. Now, this is not the first time that the UFC has been embroiled in a betting scandal or, at a bare minimum, a strange situation in betting. The biggest one would be the one in 2022 where James Krause was a coach at the time, a gym owner, the whole nine yards, and one of his students or, fighters that he coached, Derek Minor, was involved in a kind of a similar situation where he loses to TKO to somebody that you wouldn't necessarily have expected, but more to the point, there was this strange betting that moved the lines dramatically right before the fight itself. Ultimately, Minner has been basically excommunicated from combat sports. James Krause, similar kind of thing. They both earned suspensions from the Nevada Athletic Commission. That's the big one. I don't know where those stand because there was really never any, to the best of our knowledge, there was really no legal implications from that, but I guess we'll have to see. Maybe there could be coming forward. The other one, of course, was involving Taehyung Bang, who served a bit of a small prison sentence in South Korea for basically throwing a fight against Leo Kuntz at an event that took place in Seoul. Now, the question is, what is supposed to happen here? Number one, UFC hasn't said anything, and I can understand that if they need time to collect the facts because of it being a highly delicate situation and them and other entities involved in this as well, then I think, some level of understanding of that is actually quite important. Fine, fair enough. But at some point they need to comment about this, and pretty quickly too. The clock is ticking. Understanding something, Betting is a part of sports now, and as I've indicated on this channel many times, the relationship between combat sports and betting is much more long-standing and robust than it is for other sports. But the truth is, the system only works if the integrity of it can be maintained, which means there has to be effective enforcement for rule breakers. Now, again, facts need to be collected about this situation, and there is a lot that we still do not know. But to the extent that laws, frankly, were violated here, they have to be met with the harshest punishment imaginable. I mean, it's kind of a weird coincidence, or maybe it's not, but Dolgarian used to train with James Krause. I mean, it's just a number of red flags here that at the absolute bare minimum demand that we look into this situation without any hesitation whatsoever. Everything downstream from that is a disaster if that part can't be held together. So in order for that to be held together, rule breakers have to be identified, law breakers have to be identified, and then they have to be met with the swiftest punishment and the harshest punishment, I think, imaginable. Otherwise, everything else is just basically existential from there. There have been suggestions and outright people declaring that the FBI is looking into this, which I really, really hope is true. I hope that there is independent corroboration of this and we can get some more information. I would say that I might have a little bit of questions about that, not so much about people suggesting that they might be looking into it, but ultimately what the upside, or the upshot rather, might be in a world where the director of the FBI is a UFC fan and has wanted to do business with the UFC, and then the president or the CEO essentially of the Ultimate Fighting Championship is best friends with the president of the United States, who then appointed that commissioner of the FBI. Like, are you actually going to get the kind of proper investigation into this that you need? Now, I'm not here to declare that we won't. I certainly hope that's not the case, but at a bare minimum, I would say I have questions. I have some concerns. I think that's a good way to put it. I hope that they are not well-founded. I hope that I am being too alarmist, or I don't know what the word would be, too cynical about some of the potential conflicts there that would prevent them from looking into it. I hope that I am wrong, because if they don't do it, I don't know who's going to. I mean, again, these are questions that are non-negotiable in terms of what the answers have to be. This has to be above board. Rule breakers have to be prosecuted, and so on and so forth. Like, if you don't have that, none of these other things working in concert with each other make sense any longer. Like, it has to get done correctly. Otherwise, people will lose faith in the product. They will lose faith in their ability to wager money on it. But even aside from that, is what we're watching above board? Like, again, these are existential questions that absolutely have to get answered the right way. And it's just a bit of a weird moment too for Dolgarian, as I mentioned, just 29 years old. He came in with some good hype. He's got some good wins and some decent ability in terms of what he's shown, not so much in this bout, but in previous bouts. And again, I don't know what's about to happen to him, but if there's even a whiff of you're willing to, again, it is alleged, it is suggested by some that he could have engaged in this behavior. To the extent that that is true, dude, you're just nuking your future. Even if there isn't any legal consequence for it, and again, that might be on the table too, depending on what happens. But like, let's assume for just the sake of argument that that's not on there, right? That is not a part of it. It doesn't even necessarily matter in terms of his fighting future, because who is going to want to sign someone that's associated with some of these very relevant concerns? Again, it's all existential. It's like once these kinds of problems emerge, they have to be stamped out immediately, thoroughly, forcefully. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work otherwise. And for a guy like that to have potentially thrown away his future, shocking to a degree. Shocking. Another interesting part of this conversation is kind of the fighter pay part of it. And it's a weird one because Craig Carton, or it's an interesting one, I should say. Weird is maybe the wrong way to put it. But Craig Carton, who I used to host a show with on Spike TV, He obviously did some jail time for problems related to his gambling, including wire fraud and some other things. He went to prison, and I think he did a lot of work on his gambling addiction. He's admitted he was a gambling addict. And he said that the amount of money that somebody makes is not really necessarily the most important matter. If they're addicted to gambling, then this is a thing that can happen. And it was kind of interesting. Dolgarian, even during fight week, was suggesting to MMA Junkie that the fighters essentially who win should get a cut of the winning, a percentage of the winning bets that are made on them. So it's not like he's not aware of, like, sort of the market economy around this and how it all works. But the question about pay is, folks are like, well, if they don't make enough, then it could potentially heighten the degree to which they would be interested in engaging in conduct like this. I'm sympathetic to the argument. I mean, if there's a big problem in MMA today, fighter pay is a big part of it. At the same time, though, that doesn't necessarily preclude people from engaging in these kinds of activities, as we've seen with the NBA betting scandal, where guys are making enormous sums of money. So I just think can it be the case that in certain cases the amount of money in no way has an effect? Yes. In other cases, can the amount of money in a different sense also potentially affect how, or incentivize, or otherwise encourage people who, are in a theoretical sense less scrupulous to engage in this kind of behavior? I'm sympathetic to that argument as well. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if I hear back from US Integrity, IC360, I will absolutely report back to all of you. Something to keep in mind, UFC is right back in the apex this next weekend. They got the Bonfim versus Brown card. So they're back in Las Vegas. They're back on ESPN Plus. They're back in Nevada. All right, they're staying in Nevada, but you get the idea. Like, it's the same kind of thing. They're probably going to have to face the press. They're probably going to have some kind of response. So we're going to be reporting on everything that we know from here on out. Stay tuned for more.